Eliza Quill, a weary bureaucrat in a government office that regulates nonsense time travel permits, unicorn parking, and misplaced Mondays, alongside whimsical co-workers like rebellious Myra and eccentric Felix. Eliza battles mounting chaos as absurdity begins to defy control. When a faceless auditor threatens to erase all illogic, Eliza must decide whether to preserve order or embrace the creative madness that keeps their world alive. Blending humor, satire, and surreal philosophy, the story explores bureaucracy, imagination, and the fragile balance between logic and lunacy in a world where nonsense is law. The Bureau of Absurd Affairs was not your typical government office. Nestled inconspicuously in a nondescript building on the corner of Anywhere and Nowhere streets, it looked from the outside like any other grey, bureaucratic establishment. Yet inside, fluorescent lights buzzed relentlessly over rows of desks piled high with paperwork that defied common sense. Here, the impossible was not merely tolerated, was licensed, catalogued, and regulated. Eliza Quill arrived promptly at 9 o'clock, her short-cropped dark hair perfectly framing the sharp lines of her glasses. Her fingers were perpetually stained with ink, a testament to a lifetime spent wrestling with paperwork that made less sense with every passing day. Today was no different. The time travel licenses her domain were stacked in towering piles, each a petition for permission to slip through the fabric of time, complete with paradox risk assessments and temporal compliance checklists. Eliza's desk was a microcosm of controlled chaos. A flickering monitor displayed an erratic timeline, occasionally glitching with sudden flashes of dates that shouldn't exist or moments that seemed to loop endlessly. She tapped her pen against the form of a Mr. Hargrove, who requested to revisit his yesterday twice over, a request that had already been denied thrice, but somehow kept resurfacing. "Time is the substance I am made of," Eliza murmured, quoting from a dusty tome of absurdist literature she kept hidden beneath her keyboard. "And yet, it's a substance we're all perpetually out of." She allowed a brief, wry smile before returning to her work. Across the room, Harold Pindle hovered anxiously over a stack of unicorn parking permits. His slicked-back grey hair was immaculate, but the ill-fitting suit he wore betrayed his nervous energy. His oversized spectacles magnified his eyes as he obsessively scanned forms, correcting colleagues for commas out of place and signatures that didn't quite match the strict bureaucratic standards. His world was one of rules, order, and an unshakable belief in the sanctity of procedure. "Permit 452B is invalid," Harold snapped, pointing his finger at a form Myra Tock had just submitted. Myra, the junior clerk with brightly colored hair and clothes that clashed in a riot of mismatched patterns, barely looked up from her sketchbook, where she doodled creatures that seemed to leak from the very edges of reality. "Relax, Harold," she chirped. "A little imagination never hurt anyone. Besides, I think this unicorn deserves a break." Harold's face tightened. Rules are rules. Without them, this bureau would descend into chaos. Isn't that the point? Mira winked, flashing a grin that was equal parts mischief and earnestness. The tension between them was palpable, a dance of ideologies that played out daily amid the hum of the office's malfunctioning absurdity machines. At the back of the room, Felix Grimble, an archivist whose eccentricity was as colorful as his bow ties, bumbled through a mountain of papers. His spectacles perched precariously low on his nose. He muttered to himself as he searched for a misplaced file that had somehow wandered into the realm of lost Tuesdays. "Ah, here it is," Felix exclaimed, triumphantly holding aloft a crumpled permit. His cheerfulness was a balm to the otherwise stifling atmosphere. The receptionist, Greta Loop, filtered a stream of outlandish requests, Mondays. unauthorized time loops, and the occasional complaint about unicorns parking too long in no parking zones. She was the first line of defense against the flood of nonsense that threatened to overwhelm the Bureau's fragile order. As the morning wore on, subtle signs of disruption began to surface. The time travel licenses flickered with unexplained anomalies. Unicorns appeared in unauthorized zones, despite meticulous permit checks. Misplaced Mondays seemed to pile up inexplicably, defying all attempts at regulation. Eliza noticed the glitches first, a sense of unease creeping beneath her pragmatic exterior. She exchanged worried glances with Harold, whose usual confidence was giving way to apprehension. Myra, for her part, seemed invigorated by the chaos, her sketches growing more elaborate and wild. "Something's off," Eliza said quietly to herself as she stared at the flickering timeline. "And it's not just the usual nonsense." As the day closed, the clerks gathered briefly around Felix's cluttered desk. His jovial demeanor masked a seriousness that belied his forgetful nature. "We need to keep a close eye on these disturbances," Eliza said, her voice firm but tinged with uncertainty. "The balance between order and absurdity is more delicate than ever." Harold nodded slowly, his rigid belief shaken but not broken. Myra's eyes sparkled with a mixture of excitement and defiance. The Bureau of Absurd Affairs was alive with possibility and peril. As Eliza returned to her desk, she whispered another quote, almost to herself. "The only way to make sense of nonsense is to live within it." And with that, the dance between order and absurdity began anew, setting the stage for the bewildering journey ahead. But beneath the surface, something darker stirred, a shadow that threatened the very fabric of the Bureau's peculiar universe. For now, it remained hidden, lurking quietly in the fluorescent buzz. And so the day ended, not with resolution, but with questions. The kind that only nonsense could provoke, and only the Bureau of Absurd Affairs could hope to answer. Eliza Quill's day began like any other in the fluorescent-lit maze of the Bureau of Absurd Affairs. The hum of malfunctioning absurdity machines filled the stale air, punctuated by the rhythmic clatter of stamping permits and the low murmur of bureaucrats navigating the impossible. At her desk, a clutter of papers, pens, and half-empty coffee cups surrounded her like a fortress against the madness she willingly managed. Today, a particularly perplexing permit lay before her, a time travel license that shimmered and flickered as if caught in a temporal storm. The document's edges quivered, the ink twisting into new forms with every blink. "A paradox in the making," she muttered, adjusting her glasses and tapping the permit with a cautious finger. "If this license activates, we risk unraveling the very fabric of our timeline." Across the room, Harold Pindle was engaged in his own ritualistic battle. His oversized spectacles perched precariously on his nose as he methodically stamped unicorn parking permits, his movements precise and deliberate. Nearby, Myra Tock leaned over her desk, her brightly colored hair a stark contrast to the drab office environment. She doodled an irreverent unicorn wearing sunglasses, the creature lounging atop a pile of permits with a cheeky grin. "Miss Tock," Harold's voice cracked like a whip. "These permits must be handled with the utmost seriousness. The regulations are clear. Unicorns may only park in designated zones, no exceptions." Myra glanced up, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "But Harold, sometimes the rules need a little flexibility. What harm could a unicorn parking a block away do? Maybe it just wants a latte." Harold's face reddened. "Rules are rules. Without them, chaos reigns." Eliza sighed, rubbing her temple. The clash was as inevitable as the nonsensical phenomena they regulated. Yet today, the absurdity felt different, more volatile. The time travel permit in her hands pulsed erratically, and the air around the unicorn parking area seemed charged with a faint, magical disturbance. She rose and made her way to the maintenance bay, where Nina Voss was hunched over a console, tools scattered around her like a nest of mechanical birds. The absurdity machines responsible for stabilizing temporal permits were flickering wildly, emitting soft beeps and occasional sparks. "Nina," Eliza called softly. "The glitches are getting worse. The paradoxes, they're bleeding through the system." Nina nodded without looking up. "I've been trying to recalibrate the temporal dampeners, but something's interfering at a fundamental level. It's not just a machine fault anymore." Back in the main office, Felix Grimble was lost in a sea of paperwork, his colorful bow tie askew as he muttered incoherently. Despite his cheerful demeanor, today bore a hint of unease. His fingertips traced the edges of a file labeled "Misplaced Mondays," though his mind was distracted by the anomalies creeping into the time travel and unicorn permits. Suddenly, a loud clang echoed from the parking permit station. Myra and Harold turned sharply to see a unicorn, impossibly iridescent and yawning, standing in an unauthorized zone. Harold's face twisted in horror as he reached for his stamp. "This is a direct violation," he declared, stamping the air with frustration. Myra, however, knelt beside the creature, her eyes softening. "Maybe it's just tired of the rules," she whispered. "Maybe it's trying to remind us that nonsense doesn't always fit neatly into boxes." Eliza returned to her desk, the flickering permit now pulsing like a heartbeat. "If the phenomena we regulate start to defy our regulations," she mused aloud, "what becomes of the Bureau?" Harold's rigid posture softened momentarily as he considered her words. Even he could feel the cracks forming in the foundation of their orderly world. The day wore on with mounting tension. Eliza wrestled with the paradoxical permit, consulting Nina intermittently. Mira continued her quiet rebellion through doodles and whispered conversations, challenging Harold's dogma at every turn. Felix's eccentric investigations hinted at deeper disturbances, and Harold's anxiety grew, the specter of losing control looming large. As the office lights dimmed, Eliza penned a note to her supervisors, temporal anomalies escalating. Recommend immediate review of permit protocols and machine diagnostics. Potential risk to bureau stability. Mira glanced over her shoulder, sketchbook open to a new drawing, a unicorn tangled in red tape, smiling wryly. "Maybe the nonsense is trying to tell us something," she said softly. Eliza nodded, a flicker of reluctant hope stirring beneath her frustration. The Bureau was unraveling, but perhaps, in that unraveling, lay the first threads of genuine absurdity worth embracing. And as the last permit was stamped and the final form filed, the office settled into an uneasy silence, the impossible quietly waiting to be understood. The question lingered, unspoken but unavoidable. How does one regulate nonsense when nonsense refuses to be regulated? The answer, Eliza suspected, would come not from the rulebooks, but from the chaos themselves. And that was a journey she was only beginning to accept. The office of the Bureau of Absurd Affairs was awash in the soft glow of flickering fluorescent lights, casting long shadows across desks cluttered with forms stamped in triplicate and peculiar trinkets that defied categorization. Amid the hum of antiquated air conditioning units and the muffled clatter of typewriters, some digital, some stubbornly analog Miratok sat at her desk, the epicenter of a mounting crisis, misplaced Mondays. The phenomenon wasn't new, but recently the number of complaints, requests, and frantic inquiries had surged alarmingly. Days were vanishing, swapped, or simply appearing in the wrong week, causing chaos not only in calendars, but in the very rhythm of the city's life. Myra, with her electric blue hair pulled back into a messy bun and her signature mismatched socks peeking beneath the desk, was in her element. Her sketchbook lay open, pages alive with swirling lines and fantastical creatures, some with 7 eyes, others with clock hands for Limsic, a whimsical manifestation of the Bureau's ongoing battle against temporal nonsense. "Look at this," she murmured to no one in particular, tapping a pencil against the page as she doodled a creature she called a Monday misplacer, a tiny imp-like being with a mischievous grin and a pocket watch forever set to never. Around her, the office buzzed with a peculiar mix of tension and absurdity. Across the room, Felix Grimble shuffled through piles of yellowing files. His colorful bow tie bobbed with every hurried step, and his spectacles slid precariously down his nose. Felix was the Bureau's archivist, a former magician turned paperwork wizard whose eccentric methods often raised eyebrows but rarely failed to deliver results. Today, his mission was daunting: locate the elusive files on the most recent wave of misplaced Mondays before they vanished into the bureaucratic ether. "Ah, here we go," Felix whispered triumphantly, clutching a folder that seemed to hum faintly with temporal energy. He flipped it open, pages fluttering as if caught in a breeze from another dimension. "These misplaced Mondays are more slippery than a greased otter on a water." Mira glanced over, her eyes sparkling with a mixture of amusement and admiration. "Only you would compare temporal anomalies to otters, Felix." Felix grinned, adjusting his bow tie. One must find joy in the little things when dealing with cosmic nonsense. Meanwhile, Eliza Quill stood by the window, her fingers stained with ink from a half-finished report. Her short dark hair framed a face marked by quiet determination and a hint of weariness. She was the lead clerk overseeing time travel licenses, a position that demanded a level of pragmatism, often at odds with the Bureau's inherent absurdity. Yet, even she couldn't ignore the creeping sensation that the misplaced Mondays were symptomatic of a deeper fracture in the system. She murmured under her breath, quoting an obscure piece of absurdist literature: "When the day misplaces itself, the mind must follow, lest reality unravel like a poorly knit sweater." The words felt eerily prophetic. In the meeting room, the atmosphere was thick with debate. Clerks gathered around a cluttered table, papers strewn about like fallen leaves. Mira had pinned several of her sketches to the cork border, colorful juxtaposition of whimsy against the drab beige walls. "These aren't just doodles," she insisted, gesturing animatedly. "They're representations. If we can understand the creatures symbolizing these misplaced days, maybe we can predict where they'll turn up next." Harold Pindle, the Bureau's ever-anxious supervisor for unicorn parking permits, cleared his throat nervously from the back. "Ms. Tack, with all due respect, we cannot base policy on fanciful drawings. We need data, regulations, and adherence to procedure." The room tensed. Myra's eyes flashed, but before she could respond, Felix interjected, "Sometimes, Harold, the data hides in the chaos. It's our job to find it, no matter how messy the trail." Eliza nodded thoughtfully, breaking her silence. "Felix has a point. The misplaced Mondays aren't just clerical errors. They're symptoms of a system stretched too thin. We need to rethink how we approach this, not just with rules but with imagination." The debate continued, voices rising and falling like the unpredictable rhythm of the very days they sought to regulate. Outside, the city moved obliviously, its inhabitants grumbling about lost appointments and confused schedules. As the day wore on, Myra returned to her sketches, adding intricate details to her Monday misplacer creatures. Felix, armed with his newly found files, began to cross-reference patterns. Eliza drafted a plan to convene a special task force, blending the creative and the procedural. The chapter closes with the Bureau poised on the brink of transformation, caught between the relentless grind of bureaucracy and the wild, untamable spirit of nonsense. As Myra's pen hovered over the page, she whispered, "Maybe misplaced Mondays aren't a problem to fix, but a puzzle to embrace." Outside the window, the city clock struck an ambiguous hour. Neither Tuesday nor Monday, but something altogether new, an invitation to reconsider the very nature of time itself. The fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting a jittery glow over the rows of cubicles that made up the Bureau of Absurd Affairs. It was just past mid-morning, and the usual hum of copiers and the clatter of typewriters formed a discordant symphony in the stale air. Yet beneath the mundane sounds lay an undercurrent of unease, as if the very walls themselves sensed the shifting tides within the bureau. Eliza Quill sat at her desk, her eyes scanning the latest batch of time travel license applications. The forms were as bizarre as ever. One applicant requested permission for a temporal detour to the 17th century to attend a sorcerer's convention. Another sought to reverse a regrettable decision made 3 Tuesdays ago. Her fingers, perpetually stained with ink from scribbling notes and corrections, hovered over the keyboard, hesitating as the terminal flickered with unusual glitches. A sudden temporal paradox had been detected in the system, a ripple threatening to unravel the delicate balance the Bureau maintained. She sighed, muttering under her breath a line from a forgotten absurdist play, "When clocks wear hats, time itself takes a holiday." It was a wry reminder of the absurdity she managed daily, a shield against the creeping cynicism that threatened to swallow her whole. Across the room, Harold Pindle was a stark contrast to Eliza's calm pragmatism. His slicked-back grey hair gleamed under the flickering lights, and his oversized spectacles slid down his nose as he obsessively sorted through unicorn parking permits. The permits were color-coded, numbered, and stamped with seals of genuine magical origin. Harold's fingers trembled slightly as he adjusted a stack, his mind racing with fears of overbooking and unauthorized magical vehicles infringing on designated zones. He glanced nervously toward the hallway. Earlier, he had caught a glimpse of a figure, a man in a black suit, faceless behind a mirrored mask, gliding silently past the office entrance. The sight had unsettled him profoundly. Who was this shadowy visitor? What did his presence signify? His thoughts spiraled into worst-case scenarios, each more alarming than the last. "Harold," Eliza called softly, noticing his distracted state. "Focus on the permits, not shadows." Harold forced a tight smile but could not shake the feeling of impending doom. The Bureau's fragile order was under threat, and he feared his efforts might not be enough to hold the line. Meanwhile, Miratok, the junior clerk, known for her whimsical approach to the bizarre, was absent from her usual spot. Her mismatched clothes and bright hair were missing from the office today, and her sketchbook lay closed on her desk. The usual lightness she brought to the Bureau was noticeably absent, as if the atmosphere itself weighed heavier in her absence. The break room was a sanctuary of sorts, dimly lit and cluttered with mismatched chairs and a perpetually humming coffee machine. Here, Eliza, Harold, and a few others gathered during short breaks, sharing quiet moments away from the relentless paperwork. Today, the conversations were subdued, punctuated by uneasy silences and furtive glances toward the corridor. "Did you see him?" Harold whispered, the auditor. Eliza nodded, pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose. "Yes. A reminder that our world is not as safe as we pretend." "He represents everything we fight against," Harold muttered. "Cold logic, order without imagination, the end of nonsense. Eliza's eyes darkened with a mix of frustration and resolve. And yet, we cannot dismiss him. If the balance tips too far, chaos consumes us. But if order crushes absurdity, creativity dies. Their conversation was cut short by the sudden malfunction of a nearby absurdity machine, a device responsible for regulating misplaced Mondays. The machine emitted a high-pitched whine before sputtering to silence, sending a ripple of concern through the office. Eliza stood abruptly, her mind racing. We need to investigate. This is no ordinary glitch. Something bigger is stirring. Harold reluctantly agreed, the fear in his eyes mingling with a reluctant determination. The auditor's shadow loomed large, but the bureau's clerks were not yet ready to surrender their peculiar world. As the day wore on, the tension thickened. The faceless figure's presence was a silent challenge, a harbinger of the ideological war to come. Eliza's quiet rebellion through obscure literature, Harold's mounting anxiety, and the unseen forces gathering beyond the bureau's walls, all pointed toward a reckoning. The Bureau of Absurd Affairs had always danced on the edge of reason and nonsense, but now the music was changing. Whether they would stumble or find a new rhythm remained uncertain. For now, they braced themselves, caught in the uneasy twilight where logic met lunacy, and the fate of absurdity hung in the balance. As Eliza returned to her desk, she whispered another line from her cherished absurdist tome. A mantra against despair. In the land where the impossible is law, even shadows can teach us to see. The dance had begun, and the Bureau was ready to face the shadow that threatened to silence the music of nonsense. The office hummed with the usual drone of fluorescent lights and the soft rustle of papers, but beneath that veneer of monotony, a current of unrest stirred. Myratok sat at her cluttered desk, her brightly colored hair a stark contrast to the gray cubicles around her. She tapped her pen against a sketchbook filled with whimsical doodles, dragons wearing business suits, clocks melting into coffee cups, and a particularly cheeky unicorn balancing precariously on a tightrope. Today, however, her doodles were more than mere distractions. They were blueprints for rebellion. With a sly grin, Mira pulled out a form labeled Request for Exceptional Absurd Phenomena and began to fill it out. Unlike the usual mundane applications, hers described a reverse unicorn parade, a spectacle where unicorns would unwalk their usual routes in reverse order, creating a cascade of magical confusion that defied every regulation Harold Pindle had ever enforced. The form was dotted with colorful annotations and sealed with an enthusiastic flourish. As she slid the form across to the supervisor's desk, a hush fell over the nearby clerks who watched the unfolding scene with barely concealed amusement. Harold's slicked back grey hair seemed to bristle as he adjusted his oversized spectacles, his eyes narrowing to slits. "Miss Tock," he began, voice dripping with officious severity. "You are aware that such a request violates protocol for 7B, subsection 12, relating to the orderly conduct of magical creature movement." Mira met his gaze, undeterred. "Yes, Mr. Pindle, but isn't the whole point of the Bureau to manage the impossible? Perhaps sometimes the impossible needs a little improvisation." Harold's jaw tightened. Improvisation leads to chaos. Chaos leads to the unraveling of the regulatory fabric we so painstakingly maintain. And what if that fabric is meant to be a little unraveled? Mira shot back, her eyes sparkling with defiance. At that moment, Eliza Quill, seated a few desks away, observed the exchange with a mixture of bemusement and something more complex curiosity, perhaps. Her ink-stained fingers drummed lightly on the edge of a stack of time travel licenses, the latest batch riddled with paradox warnings and temporal anomalies. Usually, she maintained a pragmatic, almost cynical distance from the chaos that Myra seemed to court so eagerly. But today, Eliza found herself wondering if there was merit in embracing the unpredictable, in letting the absurd have its moment to breathe. The tension between Harold and Myra was soon interrupted by an unexpected commotion. A sudden influx of misplaced Monday requests flooded the system, triggering a cascade of absurd malfunctions. Calendars on every desk flipped backward, clocks chimed 13 times at irregular intervals, and a soft, disorienting hum filled the air as glitching absurdity machines sputtered and sparked. Myra laughed, a bright, uninhibited sound that cut through the office's usual sterility. See, a little chaos can be quite invigorating. Harold, however, was not amused. He scrambled to contain the malfunction, barking orders and waving a clipboard as if it were a magic wand that could restore order. Eliza, caught between the two, felt the stirrings of change within herself, reluctant acknowledgement that the Bureau's rigid rules might need bending if nonsense was to survive. The day closed with the clerks exhausted but strangely enlightened. Myra's rebellion had ignited a spark, Harold's defenses had been cracked, and Eliza's doubts had begun to bloom into possibility. Somewhere in the mingled scent of ink, paper, and flickering fluorescent light, the Bureau of Absurd Affairs danced its delicate dance once more between order and chaos, sense and nonsense, the known and the impossible. And as the last clock chimed into the twilight hour, the question lingered in the air: could the Bureau truly regulate absurdity without losing its soul? The answer, like all things in this peculiar place, remained delightfully uncertain. The morning began like any other within the sterile, fluorescent-lit confines of the Bureau of Absurd Affairs. Harold Pindle was already at his desk, meticulously aligning a fresh stack of unicorn parking permits with an almost reverential precision. His slicked-back grey hair caught the dim light, and his oversized spectacles perched precariously at the bridge of his nose as he squinted at the fine print. The quiet hum of the office was punctuated only by the faint rustling of papers and the occasional distant whinny that seemed to echo from beyond the Bureau's glass walls. Permit number 4723, Zone 7B, expires at midnight, Harold muttered under his breath, tapping a sharpened pencil against the desk. No deviations allowed. Across the room, Miratok bounced in her chair, eyes darting between her sketchbook and the flickering monitor displaying real-time unicorn parking statistics. Her brightly colored hair was a kaleidoscope of neon blues and pinks, mismatched clothes forming a vibrant counterpoint to the office's drab grays. She doodled absent-mindedly unicorns prancing, tangled in traffic cones, or perched awkwardly atop parking meters, each stroke infused with a playful irreverence. Eliza Quill, meanwhile, sat poised at her workstation, her short-cropped dark hair framing a face etched with quiet pragmatism. Her perpetually ink-stained fingers tapped rhythmically on her keyboard as she reviewed time travel licenses, occasionally glancing toward Harold with a raised eyebrow. The tension in the air was palpable, though the source remained frustratingly elusive. Suddenly, a faint shimmer outside caught Eliza's attention. She rose from her chair and peered through the glass partition that separated the Bureau from the bustling city streets. There, in the early morning light, an iridescent horn glistened unmistakably, a unicorn. Then another, and another. Soon, a cluster of these magical creatures filled the sidewalks, some nervously shifting their hooves, others flicking their manes in confusion. "That can't be right," Eliza murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Back at his desk, Harold's face drained of color as he frantically rifled through permit files. No, This is impossible. The quotas were carefully calculated. There's no way we authorized this many unicorns at once. Myra's eyes sparkled with mischievous delight. Looks like someone's not following the rules. Or maybe the rules just aren't enough. Harold shot her a glare. Rules are the only thing keeping this place from descending into chaos. Outside, the city's rhythm stuttered. Pedestrians stopped to gape at the unauthorized unicorns, some reaching out in wonder, others stepping back in alarm. The creatures, for their part, seemed just as bewildered by the sudden influx of their kind, their magical auras flickering uncertainly. The scene quickly escalated into a spectacle. A particularly elegant unicorn, its coat shimmering with a pearlescent sheen, found itself tangled in a cluster of street signs, its glowing permit tag dangling loosely from its neck. Nearby children pointed excitedly, while adults scrambled for their phones to capture the unfolding chaos. Back inside the bureau, the phone lines buzzed incessantly. Reporters clamored for statements, city officials demanded explanations, and Harold's usual composure gave way to a frazzled desperation. He barked orders, attempting to coordinate a response, but the sheer scale of the crisis overwhelmed even his fastidious nature. Into this maelstrom strode Juno Sparks, the bureau's most relentless investigative journalist. Her short red hair was tousled from the brisk morning air, and her leather jacket bore the marks of countless urban adventures. Her camera clicked sharply as she scanned the frantic office, her sharp gaze settling on Harold. "Care to explain how your unicorn permit system ended up causing a citywide magical traffic jam?" she asked, voice dripping with sardonic amusement. Harold adjusted his spectacles, cheeks flushed. "I assure you, Ms. Sparks, we are doing everything within our power to rectify this situation. These are unprecedented circumstances." Juno smirked. "Unprecedented or not, the public deserves answers, and I intend to get them." Mira, ever the free spirit, sidled up to Juno with a mischievous grin. "Maybe it's time the bureau loosened up a bit. Rules can't contain everything, you know." Eliza watched the exchange silently, her mind racing. The overbooking crisis was more than a bureaucratic hiccup. It was a symptom of a deeper imbalance between the rigidity of regulation and the wild unpredictability of nonsense itself. Throughout the day, the bureau became a hive of frenzied activity. Staff scrambled to issue emergency permits, redirect unicorns, and manage public relations. Felix Grimble popped in briefly, his colorful bow tie almost blending with the swirling chaos, offering cryptic advice about magical flow and the art of letting go. Harold, usually unshakable in his devotion to procedure, found himself questioning the inflexibility he had always championed. Myra's exuberance and Juno's probing questions chipped away at his certainty, revealing cracks in the veneer of control. By evening, the city's streets had cleared of unauthorized unicorns, the crisis seemingly contained. Yet the bureau's halls echoed with uneasy silence. The overbooking had exposed vulnerabilities and sparked debates that would ripple through the organization for weeks to come. Eliza gathered the clerks for a brief meeting. "We must reconsider how we regulate nonsense," she said, her voice steady but tinged with newfound resolve. "If we cling too tightly to rules, we risk breaking the very magic we aim to protect." Harold nodded slowly, the weight of the day's events settling upon him. "Perhaps there is room for flexibility." Mira grinned, and a little chaos never hurt anyone. Outside, as twilight deepened, the city settled back into its peculiar rhythm. The Bureau of Absurd Affairs standing at the brink of transformation. Somewhere in the distance, the faintest hint of a unicorn's whistle echoed an enduring reminder that even in the most ordered systems, Absurdity finds a way to dance. The chapter closes with the Bureau facing an uncertain future, where the balance between order and chaos must be carefully negotiated. The question lingers: can the bureaucrats adapt quickly enough to embrace the unpredictable magic they regulate before the next crisis erupts? The humming of machines filled the cramped back room of the Bureau of Absurd Affairs, a low mechanical drone punctuated by the occasional spark and clatter. Nina Voss crouched near a sputtering device, her grease-smeared fingers deftly manipulating wires and gadgets that defied ordinary logic. The Absurdity, machine one of several designed to calibrate and regulate time travel permits, had been malfunctioning for days, causing delays and paradoxical glitches in the city's temporal bureaucracy. Eliza Quill stood beside her, clutching an ink-stained logbook, her glasses perched precariously on the bridge of her nose. Her short-cropped dark hair was slightly tousled, a testament to the long hours spent chasing the elusive balance between order and chaos. As Nina fiddled with a frayed cable, Eliza's sharp eyes scanned the latest anomaly reports, searching for patterns in the madness. "If this machine shorts out again," Nina muttered, "we might have a temporal cascade on our hands. Imagine the paperwork for that." She offered a wry smile, but her hands betrayed her concern as they carefully adjusted a blue glowing coil. Eliza sighed, recalling the incident from last week when a misplaced Tuesday had caused 3 clients to show up simultaneously in the past, present, and future. "It's a wonder the city hasn't folded in on itself yet," she said, quoting softly from an obscure, absurdist text she'd read years ago. "Chaos is a kind of order, but this is just sloppiness." Nina glanced up, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Maybe sloppiness is the best kind of order we've got." Their tentative camaraderie was interrupted by a knock on the door. Carl Tannen entered, his conservative suit slightly rumpled, a stack of legal documents clutched tightly in one hand. His stern face bore the marks of many sleepless nights spent drafting regulations that tried to cage the wild, unpredictable phenomena the Bureau oversaw. "Eliza," he began, his voice clipped, "we need to discuss the latest revisions to the temporal licensing guidelines. The current wording is too vague, allowing for too much interpretive leeway. We cannot afford such ambiguity." Eliza nodded, but her eyes flickered toward Nina, who gave a subtle shrug. Fixing a machine was one thing. Rewriting the rules that governed nonsense was another entirely. Later, in the dimly lit conference room, Carl stood before a whiteboard cluttered with diagrams and legalese. Harold Pindle, the Bureau's obsessive supervisor of unicorn parking permits, sat stiffly at the table, his oversized spectacles reflecting the fluorescent light. His suit was a size too large, his slicked back grey hair immaculate, but his expression increasingly anxious. "These proposed changes," Harold said nervously, tapping his pen against a sheaf of forms, "will open loopholes that could be exploited. Unicorns might park wherever they please, and time travel could become a free-for-all. We must maintain strict control." Carl's eyes narrowed. "Harold, the rigidity of your approach is precisely what's causing these paradoxes. We need flexibility to accommodate the unpredictable nature of nonsense." Harold's face flushed. Flexibility is a euphemism for chaos. Eliza, seated quietly at the back, watched the exchange with a mix of exasperation and amusement. The clash of personalities was as much a part of the Bureau's ecosystem as the absurd phenomena they regulated. Back in the workshop, Nina and Eliza tested the recently repaired machine. As it hummed steadily, emitting a soft blue glow, the tension in the room eased. "Looks like we're back in business," Nina said, wiping her hands on a rag. Eliza smiled faintly, the first genuine smile in days. For now, but the machines are only part of the equation. The rules, the people, everything has to align. Otherwise, the whole thing unravels. Their brief moment of hope was tempered by the knowledge that the Bureau's delicate machinery, both literal and figurative, was under constant threat from within and without. Harold's inflexibility, Carl's legal labyrinth, and the ever-creeping chaos of nonsense meant that every day was a battle to keep absurdity from spilling into anarchy. As the day wore on, Harold returned to his office, flustered and clutching his documents. Carl followed, ready to continue their endless debate over bureaucratic minutiae. Eliza remained behind, her fingers tapping a restless rhythm on her desk, already contemplating the next challenge. In the Bureau of Absurd Affairs, the dance between order and chaos played out not just in the phenomena they regulated, but in the hearts and minds of the clerks who managed the impossible. And as the fluorescent lights flickered overhead, one thing was certain: the absurdity was far from over. The fluorescent lights of the Bureau of Absurd Affairs flickered sporadically, casting long, jittery shadows across the endless rows of filing cabinets and permit shelves. Somewhere, deep within the vault of time travel licenses, a soft, irregular pulse echoed faintly, hum out of sync with the steady drone of bureaucracy. Eliza Quill stood before a translucent display panel, her glasses fogged slightly from hours spent hunched over documentation. Her fingers, perpetually ink-stained from the mountain of paperwork she managed, hovered hesitantly over the controls. The rogue license was an anomaly, a wild card threatening the delicate weave of nonsense the Bureau so painstakingly maintained. "Look at this," Eliza murmured, bringing the flickering license into sharp focus. The edges shimmered erratically, the dates and timestamps spinning in impossible loops. "It's generating a paradox, one that's bleeding into other permits. If it spreads, the entire system could collapse." Nina Voss appeared at her side, her tool belt jangling softly as she carried a compact diagnostic device. "I've been tracking glitches in the absurdity machines," she said, voice tight with concern. "This license is triggering malfunctions across multiple departments. Time travel permits are becoming unstable, and the machines that regulate them are overheating." Eliza nodded, her mind racing. "We need to isolate it, but the system's architecture wasn't built for this kind of anomaly. It's like trying to patch a crack in reality with duct tape." Felix Grimble shuffled in, spectacles perched precariously low on his nose. "I might have something," he said, fingers twitching as if conjuring magic from thin air. Old records hint at a similar event decades ago, though the details are sparse. If we can find the original containment protocols, there might be a way to stabilize the paradox. The three of them gathered around a cluttered desk, papers and glowing tablets strewn about like the remnants of a storm. Felix pulled out a dusty, leather-bound ledger, its pages yellowed and curling. "Here," he said, pointing to a cryptic entry, "the temporal anomaly directive. It's incomplete, but it suggests using synchronized absurdity pulses to neutralize paradoxical energy." Nina frowned. "Our absurdity machines can generate those pulses, but they're delicate and prone to failure. We'd need to recalibrate the entire network to respond in unison." Eliza's gaze hardened with resolve. "Then that's what we'll do. This bureau exists because nonsense needs rules, but sometimes the rules need to bend. Let's get to work." The next hours blurred into a whirlwind of activity. Nina crawled beneath humming consoles, her hands deftly rewiring circuits and adjusting flux capacitors devices that looked suspiciously like overgrown toaster ovens patched with bits of clockwork. Felix flitted between filing cabinets, and arcane tomes, muttering fragments of forgotten spells that seemed to spark faintly in the sterile air. Eliza coordinated their efforts, issuing crisp commands while mentally calculating the ripple effects of every adjustment. As the synchronized absurdity pulse built momentum, the rogue license's erratic glow began to pulse in time, its chaotic energy slowly corralled by the Bureau's makeshift containment field. The hum grew louder, a rising crescendo that filled the vault with a tangible vibration. Suddenly, the flickering license stabilized, its edges solidifying into a coherent time stomp. The paradox was contained. Eliza exhaled deeply, the weight of relief washing over her. "It's not perfect," she admitted, "but it's enough to hold for now. We need to investigate how the license went rogue in the first place." Felix nodded, adjusting his bow tie with a wry smile. "And I suspect this is only the beginning. The fabric of nonsense is fraying, and we're the only ones who can mend it." Outside the vault, the Bureau's main office buzzed with renewed energy. Clerks, who had been paralyzed by fear and confusion, now rallied around Eliza's calm leadership. Harold Pindle, ever anxious but dutiful, paced nervously, muttering about regulations and protocol breaches. Despite his unease, he recognized the necessity of the team's unconventional methods. Eliza caught his eye and offered a small, reassuring smile. "We'll get through this," she said quietly. "The Bureau always does." But as the hum of the machines resumed its steady rhythm and the glow from the rogue license dimmed to a harmless pulse, an unspoken question hung in the air. How many more paradoxes lurked in the shadows, waiting to unravel the absurd order they had sworn to protect? The fragile balance between absurdity and reality was under threat. The Bureau of Absurd Affairs was its last, best defense. The Bureau of Absurd Affairs had always been a peculiar place in Ireland, where nonsense was not only tolerated, but meticulously catalogued, regulated, and, above all, controlled. Yet, beneath the hum of fluorescent lights and the endless clatter of typewriters and keyboards, a quiet storm was brewing. It began with whispers, subtle hints exchanged in hushed tones behind closed doors and flickering computer screens showing lines of code that should never have been tampered with. Eliza Quill sat at her cluttered desk, the glow of her monitor casting sharp shadows on her ink-stained fingers. She was reviewing time travel license applications when a faint murmur drifted through the corridor. Curiosity pricked at her, and she glanced up just in time to catch a glimpse of Harold Pindle slipping into the shadowed hallway opposite her office. Eliza's brow furrowed. Harold was the epitome of bureaucratic devotion, meticulous, rule-bound, and unwaveringly loyal to the Bureau's procedures. But lately, something was different. There was a nervous energy about him, a furtive edge that unsettled even her cynical heart. Drawn by a mix of concern and suspicion, Eliza edged closer to the corridor's entrance, her footsteps muffled by the threadbare carpet. There, in the dim light, Harold was engaged in a low conversation with a figure cloaked in shadow, unmistakable presence of cold authority. The figure's mirrored mask reflected the flickering light, obscuring all but a hint of a smirk. "The auditor, you understand the stakes, Harold." The auditor's voice was low, measured, yet possessed of an icy certainty. "Nonsense is a cancer on progress. Your cooperation will ensure a future free of chaos." Harold swallowed hard, adjusting his ill-fitting suit, his spectacles catching the light in a way that betrayed his inner turmoil. I only want what's best for the Bureau," he murmured. "Order must prevail." Meanwhile, elsewhere in the Bureau, Miratok was staging a different kind of rebellion. Her brightly colored hair was a beacon of whimsy in the sterile halls as she rallied a small but growing group of clerks and visitors alike. Armed with her ever-present sketchbook, she was crafting banners and slogans that celebrated the very absurdity the Bureau sought to regulate. Why should misplaced Mondays be shoved into forgotten corners? Mira proclaimed, her voice ringing with youthful passion. Why can't nonsense be free? It's the pulse, the heartbeat of creativity. Her words resonated. The lobby, usually a place of quiet efficiency, was alive with a buzz of excitement. The walls, once a monotonous grey, were now decorated with colourful drawings of improbable creatures and impossible events. A visual manifesto of resistance against the suffocating grip of bureaucracy. Not far from the growing protest, Juno Sparks occupied a cramped newsroom, her fingers flying over a keyboard as she pieced together a story that could shatter the Bureau's carefully maintained facade. Her red hair was aflame in the dim light, her leather jacket draped over the back of a chair littered with papers and coffee cups. Hidden files, crooked permits, and secret deals, Juno muttered, eyes narrowing. The public deserves to know what really goes on behind these walls. Her investigation was more than idle curiosity. It was a crusade against the absurdity of an institution that pretended to control nonsense but was itself riddled with contradictions and corruption. Back inside the labyrinthine archives, Felix Grimble shuffled through piles of dusty folders. His colorful bow tie was slightly askew, and his spectacles slid down his nose as he uncovered a file marked with a cryptic symbol. The faded paper crackled under his fingers as he read, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Well, he whispered, eyes twinkling with a mix of mischief and discovery. Looks like the misplaced Mondays have more secrets than we thought. Felix's forgotten past as a magician and his uncanny knack for connecting seemingly unrelated dots made him an unexpected but vital player in the unfolding drama. As the day wore on, tension within the Bureau became palpable. Harold's wavering allegiance began to leak into his interactions, causing unease among his colleagues. Eliza, ever the pragmatist, confronted him in a quiet office, the walls lined with thick volumes of regulations and licenses. "You don't have to do this, Harold," she said softly, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions beneath. "We all want order, but not at the cost of everything that makes this Bureau alive." Harold's shoulders sagged. "I feared that without strict control, everything will unravel. But maybe I've been looking at this all wrong." Meanwhile, Myra's protests grew bolder, drawing attention from the public and media alike. Juno's articles painted the Bureau as a battleground between stifling order and liberating chaos, sparking debates in cafes, homes, and city halls. The Bureau's fragile equilibrium was cracking, and as night fell, the clerks found themselves standing at a crossroads. Would they cling to the old ways, bound by rules and fear? Or would they embrace the unpredictable, the absurd, and the wonderfully impossible? The answer, like the Bureau itself, was anything but certain. And as the shadows lengthened, the whispered conspiracies promised that the coming days would challenge everything they thought they knew about nonsense, order, and the delicate dance between them. The stage was set. The players, some unwilling, some inspired, were ready. The Bureau of Absurd Affairs was about to face its greatest trial yet, one that would test the limits of bureaucracy, friendship, and the very nature of absurdity itself. And in the quiet corners of its endless corridors, the question lingered. Could nonsense survive when threatened by the cold hand of logic? Only time, and perhaps a little madness, would tell. The office was unusually quiet when Eliza Quill first noticed the subtle anomalies in the communication logs. A misplaced time stamp here, an oddly phrased memo, they're little things that didn't quite align with the usual bureaucratic humdrum. But as she delved deeper into the dusty archives, the truth unfolded like a taut string unraveling a knot. Harold Pindle, the steadfast supervisor whose allegiance to protocol was as legendary as his obsession with unicorn parking permits, had been quietly negotiating with the auditor's faction. Eliza sat alone under the flickering glow of the archive room's fluorescent lights, the stale scent of aged paper thick in the air. Her fingers, ink-stained and steady, traced the lines of coded correspondence that hinted at Harold's near defection. Each word was a dagger of disbelief. How could the man who policed every comma and dash in their absurd licenses contemplate betraying the Bureau's very mission? The revelation hit the Bureau like a thunderclap. Rumors spread fast through the labyrinthine corridors lined with filing cabinets stuffed with permits for impossibilities. Miratok, with her riot of brightly colored hair and infectious enthusiasm, was the first to transform shock into action. She commandeered the main office, a space usually filled with the relentless tap of typewriters and the murmur of meticulous clerks, turning it into a vibrant stage for protest. Banners with slogans like "Embrace the absurd" and "Chaos is bureaucracy's best friend" fluttered amid the clatter. Myra's voice rose above the din, rallying her colleagues with a mix of whimsy and fierce resolve. The usually subdued clerks found themselves swept up in a wave of energy that defied the sterile rules they'd lived by. Meanwhile, Harold found himself cornered in the quiet of the conference room. His slicked-back grey hair seemed uncharacteristically disheveled under the weight of his conscience. Facing Eliza's unwavering gaze, he was a man stripped bare of his usual defenses. The absurdly oversized clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, each second an echo of his fractured loyalty. "I never meant to harm the Bureau," he confessed quietly, voice trembling. "I believed the auditor's vision of order was right, but I was wrong. I see now that without nonsense, there is no life." Eliza's disappointment was palpable, but beneath it lay a flicker of understanding. The Bureau was built on contradictions, order and chaos entwined in a delicate dance. Harold's misstep was a painful reminder of their shared humanity amid the madness. Outside, Juno Sparks documented the unfolding drama with her ever-present camera. The clicks of her shutter punctuated the chorus of chants and laughter, capturing the Bureau's moment of reckoning. Her investigative reports would soon stir public debate, spotlighting the absurd institution's struggle to balance regulation with freedom. Felix Grimble, the eccentric archivist, watched the protest with a bemused smile, colorful bow ties slightly askew. "Sometimes," he mused aloud to a passing clerk, "you need a little chaos to find your way back to order." As the protest crescendoed, the Bureau's rigid policies began to crack, and the clerks faced a choice: cling to the brittle certainties of the past, or embrace the unpredictable future that Myra's movement heralded. The lines had been crossed, and the dance between order and absurdity was poised to enter a new, exhilarating phase. The chapter closes on Eliza standing at her desk, gazing out at the bustling protest with a mixture of hope and apprehension. The quiet hum of the Bureau was forever changed, and so were its people. Somewhere between betrayal and renewal, the Bureau of Absurd Affairs found a heartbeat messy, vibrant, and undeniably alive. And just maybe, that was the point. The humming of the absurdity machines was a dull roar in the cavernous chamber beneath the Bureau of Absurd Affairs, where light flickered intermittently from fractured bulbs overhead. Eliza Quill stood motionless, her ink-stained fingers loosely clutching a time-travel license that seemed to pulse with a quiet urgency. Her short-cropped dark hair caught stray beams of light as she adjusted her glasses, eyes narrowing against the dimness. Across from her, the auditor stood a stoic figure clad in a perfectly tailored black suit, their face obscured behind a mirrored mask that reflected Eliza's own image back at her. The silence between them was thick, pregnant with unspoken truths and the weight of years. Eliza, the auditor's voice was smooth yet cold, echoing softly in the chamber. You've come far since the days when misplaced Tuesdays nearly unraveled this entire bureau. Eliza's breath caught. That day was etched into her memory, a chaotic blur of temporal dissonance and bureaucratic collapse. She remembered the frantic shouts, the endless reams of paperwork, and the sinking feeling that the rules they enforced were as fragile as the nonsense they sought to regulate. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said, voice steady despite the tension coiling in her chest. "After all, you left the bureau for a reason." The auditor's mirrored masks seemed to shimmer, distorting their reflection. "I left because the bureau became a prisoner cage of contradictions. You cling to chaos wrapped in red tape, but I seek a future where reason prevails." Eliza's gaze sharpened. And what of creativity, imagination, the very essence of nonsense? "Imagination is a luxury that order cannot afford," the auditor replied flatly. "Your so-called absurdity threatens progress. It is my mission to cleanse this city of the distractions that impede true advancement." For a moment, the only sound was the low hum of the machines, their erratic flickers casting fractured shadows on the concrete walls. Then Eliza found her voice, quoting softly, "The truth will set you free, but first it will make you miserable." The auditor tilted their head, intrigued. "Vonnegut, a philosopher of the absurd," Eliza replied with a faint smile. "He understood the delicate dance we perform here between order and chaos, logic and nonsense." The conversation veered into memories of a day when misplaced Mondays had thrown the bureau into disarray, a catastrophic event that had driven the auditor to sever ties and embrace radical logic. Eliza recalled how that incident had fractured their shared vision, setting them on opposing paths. "You fear chaos, but you also fear the freedom it offers," the auditor stated. "You enforce rules you secretly wish to break." Eliza's eyes flickered with conflicted emotion. "Perhaps, but without some order, nonsense becomes destructive. We manage the impossible to protect reality's fragile balance." "Or perhaps," the auditor countered, "you fear losing control." The air thickened, charged with the gravity of their ideological clash. Outside the chamber, the bureau's fluorescent-lit offices buzzed with the clatter of typewriters and murmurs of clerks navigating their daily absurdities. Here, in this hidden sanctuary, two visions for the future collided, a battle not just of policies, but of philosophies. After a long pause, the auditor stepped closer, the mirrored mask reflecting Eliza's resolute face. "You must decide, Eliza. Will you uphold a fading order or embrace the chaos that defines us?" Her heart pounded, the weight of their shared history pressing upon her. The bureau's fate and, perhaps the very fabric of nonsense itself, hinged on her choice. As the auditor turned and vanished into shadow, Eliza lingered, the echoes of their confrontation reverberating in her mind. She traced a finger over the license in her hand, the edges worn from years of handling. Somewhere between the rigid lines of regulation and the wild contours of absurdity lay a new path. Returning to the bustling office floor, Eliza found herself surrounded by the familiar cacophony of bureaucratic madness papers shuffled, phones ringing, and Myra's whimsical doodles brightening the grey walls. The dance between order and chaos continued, and Eliza felt the stirrings of change within her. With a deep breath, she stepped forward, ready to face the uncertainty ahead. The auditor's gambit had been laid bare, but the game was far from over. In the heart of the Bureau of Absurd Affairs, the future waited poised between the cold logic of eradication and the hopeful absurdity of imagination. And Eliza Quill would choose the next move. The air inside the Bureau of Absurd Affairs was thick with a peculiar tension, the kind that seems to settle just before a storm of the impossible. Felix Grimble, the Bureau's archivist, sat hunched over a cluttered desk in the depths of the archive room, surrounded by towering piles of dusty files and faded permits. His colorful bow tie bobbed rhythmically as he hummed an old tune, fingers riffling through brittle paper with surprising dexterity. It was an ordinary day by the Bureau's standards, yet beneath the surface a tempest was brewing. Felix's eccentricity was well known, a retired magician turned bureaucrat whose forgetfulness was only rivaled by his uncanny ability to find exactly what was needed in the most chaotic of messes. But today, his usual scatterbrained demeanor was sharpened by a flicker of recognition. Tucked away in the farthest corner of the archive, behind stacks of misplaced paperwork, was a narrow drawer etched with faded gold lettering, Arcane Anomalies. Felix's heart quickened as he slid it open, revealing a collection of ancient scrolls, cryptic diagrams, and a peculiar assortment of objects that seemed to hum with latent energy. Eliza Quill, the lead clerk, known for her wry pragmatism and ink-stained fingers, entered quietly, drawn by the soft glow emanating from the drawer. Miratok, with her vibrant hair and mismatched clothes, trailed behind, clutching her ever-present sketchbook. They exchanged curious glances as Felix pulled out a thin, weathered tome bound in worn leather. "I thought the misplaced Mondays were simply a clerical nightmare," Felix said, adjusting his spectacles, "but it seems there's a deeper, more magical root to this chaos." Eliza raised an eyebrow. "Magic, Mr. Grimble? I thought we left that kind of nonsense to the realm of metaphor." Felix chuckled, a warm, conspiratorial sound. "Ah, but nonsense is our business, isn't it? I must confess, before I joined this bureau, I was something of a magician myself, not the sort who pulls rabbits from hats, but one who understood the delicate dance between reality and the impossible." Myra's eyes sparkled with excitement. "You mean like real magic?" "Indeed," Felix nodded, "and it's precisely this forgotten knowledge that may help solve our current predicament." Over the next hours, Felix demonstrated subtle sleights of hand that produced shimmering, glowing calendar pages, each flickering through days and weeks. These ethereal pages revealed glimpses of the lost Mondays, trapped in temporal limbo, days that never quite arrived, suspended in a bureaucratic purgatory. Harold Pindle, the ever-anxious supervisor with his slicked-back grey hair and oversized spectacles, arrived just in time to witness the spectacle. His face twitched with a mix of disbelief and unease. "This is highly irregular," he muttered, adjusting his ill-fitting suit. "Magic has no place in protocol." Felix smiled gently. "Sometimes, Harold, the rigidity of protocol must bend to accommodate the unpredictable. These misplaced Mondays are not mere errors. They are disruptions in the fabric of our regulated nonsense. The ancient rituals I learned involve a precise balance, a blend of order and chaos." The room filled with a hum of anticipation as Felix prepared a makeshift ritual circle in the Bureau's break room, repurposing discarded forms and bureaucratic stamps as arcane symbols. Eliza and Myra stood nearby, their skepticism softening into cautious hope. Harold hovered at the edge, torn between his fear of change and the undeniable efficacy of Felix's methods. Felix began the incantation, a strange melody that wove through the fluorescent-lit office, mingling with the rustle of papers and the faint clacking of keyboards. The air thickened with surreal energy as glowing symbols danced across the walls, and the misplaced Mondays began to coalesce, shimmering into tangible forms. Minutes felt like hours as the bureau held its collective breath. Then, with a final flourish, Felix's ritual sealed the lost days back into the temporal flow, restoring balance. The crisis averted, a wave of relief and exhilaration washed over the clerks. "Remarkable," Eliza murmured, her cynical armor cracking. "Perhaps there is room for a little magic in our order after all." Myra grinned, already sketching the glowing calendar page in her notebook. Harold, still adjusting his spectacles, nodded slowly, a reluctant smile tugging at his lips. Felix's forgotten magic had not only saved the bureau from collapse, but had reignited its belief in the possibilities that lay at the intersection of absurdity and bureaucracy. As the fluorescent lights flickered overhead, the clerks of the Bureau of Absurd Affairs began to envision a future where creativity and regulation danced hand in hand. A future where nonsense was not just managed, but embraced. Yet, even as the misplaced Mondays settled back into their rightful place, a question lingered in the air. How could the Bureau integrate this rediscovered magic into its rigid framework, without unraveling the delicate balance they had fought so hard to maintain? The answer, much like the Bureau itself, remained tantalizingly elusive, waiting to be uncovered amid the swirling chaos of absurdity. And so, with hopeful hearts and bemused smiles, the clerks prepared to face whatever new impossibilities tomorrow might bring, their world forever altered by the forgotten magic of Felix Grimble. The city square was alive with an unusual energy that morning. Around the worn stone fountain, a gathering had formed, but this was no ordinary crowd. Amid the usual hustle of urban life, a vibrant swirl of color and sound burst forth. Hand-painted signs bobbed in the air, each emblazoned with slogans that were equal parts bureaucratic jargon and playful nonsense. "Permit the absurd," one read, another declared, "Chaos is the new order." At the heart of this spontaneous uprising stood Mirror Talk, her bright hair a beacon among the throng, her mismatched clothes fluttering in the spring breeze. Clutched in her hands was a sketchbook, its pages filled with whimsical creatures and impossible machines. She lifted her voice, clear and unwavering, as the crowd echoed her chants in gleeful unison. The scene was a celebration of absurdity itself, a deliberate, creative rebellion against the rigid strictures that had long defined the Bureau of Absurd Affairs. Back inside the Bureau's fluorescent-lit corridors, the atmosphere was far more subdued, but no less charged. Eliza Quill sat behind her cluttered desk, her fingers ink-stained from hours of paperwork. Her gaze drifted away from the temporal paradox forms to a doodle left on a scrap of paper, Myra's handiwork, a clock with melting numbers dancing across the page in a carefree jig. The image stirred something inside Eliza, a quiet challenge to her long-held skepticism. Around her, the steady hum of office chatter and the clatter of keyboards filled the air. But her mind was elsewhere, turning over the possibilities that chaos might hold. Meanwhile, Juno Sparks prowled the edges of the protest, camera slung over her leather-jacketed shoulder. Her sharp eyes caught every detail, the earnest faces of the protesters, the clever signs, the palpable tension between the desire for order and the call for creative freedom. Juno's voice, clipped and incisive, carried over the crowd as she conducted interviews, capturing voices that ranged from hopeful idealism to wary pragmatism. Her report would soon ripple through the city's consciousness, stirring debate and forcing the public to confront the strange necessity of the Bureau they had long regarded with bemused frustration. In stark contrast, Harold Pindle sat hunched in his cramped office, surrounded by towering stacks of unicorn parking permit forms. His slicked-back grey hair was disheveled, oversized spectacles slipping down his nose as he muttered corrections under his breath. Each new email about the protests or Juno's expos sent a ripple of anxiety through him. The rules he had devoted his life to upholding now seemed under siege. Yet, beneath his resistance, a small, reluctant part of him began to acknowledge the shifting tides. As days passed, Mira's movement gathered momentum. The Bureau's halls echoed with whispers of change clerks, who once clung firmly to procedure, found themselves questioning the very foundations of their work. Eliza, in particular, felt the stirrings of transformation. She began to see the unpredictable nature of nonsense not as a threat, but as an essential facet of the Bureau's existence. Her conversations with Myra grew more open, their debates a blend of pragmatism and whimsy that breathed new life into the office. Juno's articles painted the Bureau in vivid hues of satire and admiration, exposing its absurdities while highlighting the human need for such an institution. The public response was electric, a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and support that mirrored the complex emotions within the Bureau itself. Harold remained torn, but found himself drawn into policy discussions that sought to balance structure with flexibility, a delicate dance between order and chaos that no one had dared attempt before. By the chapter's end, the Bureau of Absurd Affairs was no longer merely a place of rules and paperwork. It had become a crucible of change, where the art of absurdity was not only acknowledged but embraced. The characters stood on the brink of a new era, their roles evolving as the lines between bureaucracy and creativity blurred. Eliza's newfound openness hinted at future transformations, while Myra's infectious enthusiasm promised continued disruption. As the sun set behind the city skyline, the Bureau's fluorescent lights flickered softly, casting long shadows that seemed to dance in time with the possibilities ahead. The story of nonsense regulation was far from over. In fact, it had just begun its most unpredictable chapter yet. Perhaps, Eliza mused quietly to herself, the true absurdity lies not in the nonsense we regulate, but in our resistance to it. And with that thought, the dance between order and chaos continued, inviting all who dared to join. The conference room buzzed with a delicate energy, neither wholly chaotic nor comfortably ordered. Sunlight slanted through the dusty blinds, scattering golden bars across the cluttered table beneath which legal parchments sprawled in disarray. Carl Tannen, the Bureau's legal architect, stood at the head of the table, his fingers dancing with a worn marker on the whiteboard. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee and paper, interspersed with the faint scent of Myra Tock's brightly colored ink from her ever-present sketchbook. Now, Carl began, voice steady but animated, we need to rethink these regulations, not just tweak, but fundamentally reimagine them. Our current framework is, how shall we say it, strangling the very essence of what we regulate. Harold Pindle sat stiffly, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his spectacles reflecting the chaotic scrawl on the board. I fail to see how relaxing rules will help maintain order, he said, his tone edged with anxiety. We have a mandate to preserve control. Without it, the Bureau might as well be a circus. Eliza Quill leaned forward, her ink-stained fingers tapping lightly against the table. Harold, control doesn't have to mean rigidity. Absurdity requires a framework, yes, but one that breathes. Rules that adapt rather than constrict. Think of it as a living document. Miratok smiled brightly, eyes flashing with mischief. I say let's make room for a little creative chaos. Like, Imagine if unicorn parking zones had imaginative overflow areas where rules flex with the mood of the city. Carl chuckled. The infamous imaginative overflow might just be the clause that saves us all from bureaucratic doom. Harold's brow furrowed, but there was a flicker of curiosity beneath his usual rigidity. As Carl outlined proposals for flexible clauses, allowing creative interpretations, conditional exemptions for unpredictable phenomena, and adaptive guidelines that could evolve with the city's absurdity of slow transformation began to take hold. Minutes turned to hours as the clerks debated, argued, and occasionally laughed. Myra's exuberance injected a lightness that counterbalanced Harold's meticulous caution. Eliza acted as mediator, her pragmatic yet open-minded approach smoothing tensions with quiet wisdom. At one point, Harold hesitated before crossing out a regulation he'd defended fiercely days before. His hands trembled, slightly a rare crack in his composed facade. Eliza met his gaze steadily, offering silent encouragement. "Change is difficult, but sometimes necessary," she said softly. The room's atmosphere shifted from defensive to collaborative. Mira proposed an amendment that allowed parking zones to be redefined seasonally based on the whimsical needs of the unicorn population. A suggestion initially met with incredulous stares, but eventually met with reluctant nods. Her laughter, bright and infectious, broke the tension, reminding everyone that absurdity was not just a problem to manage, but a joy to embrace. Carl meticulously transcribed each agreed-upon change, his pen moving faster than ever before as the new document took shape. A blueprint for a bureau not shackled by inflexible laws, but guided by principles that honored both order and the unpredictable magic of nonsense. As the day waned, the clerks gathered their papers, their faces reflecting a mixture of accomplishment and uncertainty. The rules they'd rewritten were not a panacea, but a beginning tentative step toward a future where bureaucracy and absurdity could coexist in dynamic harmony. Outside the window, the city pulsed with its usual discordant symphony, the distant whinny of a unicorn, the hum of malfunctioning absurdity machines, the murmur of citizens filing impossible requests. The Bureau's new regulations would not tame this chaos, but channel it. A delicate dance of structure and spontaneity destined to continue. Harold paused at the door, casting one last glance at the whiteboard now filled with flexible clauses and colorful annotations. "Perhaps," he murmured, "there is room for a little madness within order." Eliza smiled, her eyes reflecting both relief and anticipation. "And a little order within madness," she replied. As they stepped back into the fluorescent-lit halls of the Bureau of Absurd Affairs, a newfound sense of possibility hung in the air. The rules had been rewritten, but the dance between logic and nonsense was far from over. It was only just beginning. "Tomorrow," Mira whispered, sketchbook in hand, "we make absurdity official." And with that promise, the Bureau moved forward uncertain, hopeful, and ever absurd. The fluorescent lights of the Bureau of Absurd Affairs flickered in an oddly rhythmic pulse, as if in time with the heartbeat of a world where nonsense was no longer an anomaly but a way of life. Eliza Quill stood at the center of the chaos, her fingers stained with ink and her mind alight with a plan that defied every principle she once held sacred. The old ways, the endless forms, the inflexible rules had proven insufficient to contain the surging tide of absurdity that the Bureau now faced. If nonsense was to be regulated at all, it had to be embraced in all its unpredictable glory. "We're not just managing chaos," Eliza said, addressing a room filled with clerks and advisors. "We're learning to dance with it." Mira talk, her hair a riotous splash of color against the drab gray of the office, sketched furiously in her ever-present notebook. "Imagine a festival," she said, eyes sparkling, where misplaced Mondays are celebrated rather than feared, where people can revel in the unexpected and the impossible without waiting for a permit. Harold Pindle adjusted his oversized spectacles. His normally rigid posture softened by the weight of new regulations sprawled across his desk. "Flexible," he muttered, "but still within bounds. We can't let this slip into anarchy." Carl Tannen, the legal mind behind the convoluted regulations, nodded thoughtfully. "The laws must evolve. They must breathe, like the creatures we regulate." Felix Grimble, ever the eccentric archivist, shuffled through a mountain of files, pausing to pull out a curious, dust-covered tome. "There's magic in these pages," he said softly, "a kind of bureaucratic enchantment that once stabilized the most unruly of nonsenses. Perhaps it can help us again." Nina Voss, the technician, tapped a spanner against a humming absurdity machine, its gears sputtering but still alive. "If we can repair these," she said, "we can control the chaos, not by suppression but by collaboration." The bureau was alive with energy, a fusion of old and new, of order and whimsy. Eliza took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders, not as a burden, but as a mantle. The paradox of their existence was no longer a problem to solve, but a promise to keep. The dance between order and absurdity was eternal, and they were its choreographers. As the day wore on, the clerks implemented the new procedures. Forms were redesigned to include spaces for creative expression. Time travel licenses now came with a clause encouraging unexpected detours. Unicorn parking permits allowed for spontaneous celebrations in unauthorized zones. Misplaced Mondays became the highlight of the calendar, with Myra spearheading public art installations and impromptu performances. Harold watched, initially skeptical, as the office hummed with a new kind of life. His fear of losing control wrestled with a reluctant admiration for the beauty unfolding before him. "Perhaps," he whispered to himself, "there is method in this madness." Eliza caught his eye and smiled, a rare gesture that spoke of shared understanding. "It's not about control," she said quietly. "It's about coexistence." Outside, the city pulsed with the laughter of citizens embracing the absurd. The bureau, once a fortress of paperwork and rules, had become a beacon of creative regulation. The impossible was no longer a threat, but a treasure. Yet, in the quiet corners of the office, subtle glimmers of uncertainty remained. The auditor's shadow lingered, a reminder that the battle between chaos and order was far from over. But for now, the clerks reveled in their hard-won harmony, knowing that the dance continued ever unpredictable, ever vital. And as the sun set behind the city skyline, casting long, surreal shadows over the Bureau of Absurd Affairs, Eliza mused aloud, "What's next?" Mira grinned, flipping to a fresh page in her sketchbook. "Whatever nonsense decides to be," the dance went on. In the grey dawn of a city that thrived on nonsense, the Bureau of Absurd Affairs awoke to a storm. The usual hum of fluorescent lights and the soft clatter of keyboards was pierced by an unrelenting chorus of news alerts and social media uproar. Juno Sparks, the Bureau's most persistent and sardonic investigator, had released her latest expose, and it was a bombshell. The article, titled "Paperwork or Folly," inside the Bureau of Absurd Affairs, spread like wildfire. Juno's words were sharp, her tone unyielding. She described the Bureau as a Kafkaesque labyrinth of contradictory rules, whimsical mandates, and bureaucratic inertia. With a mixture of wit and scathing critique, she exposed the tangled webs of time travel licenses, unicorn parking permits, and the baffling phenomenon of misplaced Mondays that the clerks managed daily. She questioned the sanity and necessity of regulating nonsense, painting the bureau as both a guardian and a prisoner of absurdity. The press conference announcing the expos was a spectacle. Juno stood under the harsh glare of camera flashes, her red hair a vibrant beacon against the backdrop of grim-faced reporters. Her voice rang out clear and uncompromising as she answered questions, weaving anecdotes from clandestine interviews with clerks and leaked documents that revealed internal conflicts and procedural chaos. The public was captivated, divided between amusement, disbelief, and genuine concern. Back inside the bureau, the impact was immediate and palpable. Eliza Quill sat at her cluttered desk, the glow of her cracked monitor illuminating her face as she read the headline for the third time. Her fingers, perpetually stained with ink from frantic note-taking and form-filling, clenched reflexively around a time travel permit. The words on the screen echoed her own conflicted thoughts. Was their work a noble defense of the impossible, or merely a farce wrapped in red tape? Harold Pindle's office was a stark contrast, a sanctuary of order in the chaos. Yet even here, tension seeped through the walls. Harold paced anxiously, clutching a sheaf of unicorn parking permits as if they were lifelines. His slicked-back grey hair seemed more disheveled than usual, and his oversized spectacles glinted with worry. Nearby, Myra Tock sat cross-legged on the floor, her brightly colored hair a splash of rebellion amid the dull palette of bureaucratic despair. She doodled whimsical creatures on a notepad, her sketches a silent protest against the mounting pressure. "They don't understand," Harold muttered, his voice tight. "We keep things from spiraling into chaos. Without us, the city would be overrun by unregulated nonsense." Mira shrugged, her eyes sparkling with mischievous defiance. "Or maybe they're just tired of the nonsense we call order. Maybe it's time for something new." Felix Grimble and Nina Voss were a study in contrast. Felix, with his colorful bow ties and spectacles perched low on his nose, shuffled through piles of files with a distracted cheerfulness that belied the urgency of the moment. Nina, practical and focused, adjusted the settings on a malfunctioning absurdity machine, her grease-stained hands moving with precise determination. Together, they whispered plans and theories, their unlikely alliance a beacon of hope amid the swirling uncertainty. "We have to show them what the Bureau really does," Felix said, eyes twinkling behind his glasses. "Not just the paperwork, but the magic beneath." The public debate raged on. Some saw the Bureau as a necessary absurdity, a quirky but vital safeguard that protected the city's delicate balance between reality and nonsense. Others viewed it as an outdated, costly relic clinging desperately to power in a world that demanded rationality and order. Carl Tannen, the legal advisor, found himself drafting new statements and clarifications amid the chaos, his conservative demeanor strained by the need to adapt. Greta Loop, the receptionist, fielded a flood of ridiculous requests and angry calls, her dry wit a small comfort to both callers and clerks alike. As the day wore on, the clerks gathered in the break room, a motley group united by shared confusion and determination. Eliza, her voice steady despite the turmoil, addressed them. "This isn't just about us," she said. "It's about what nonsense means to this city, and maybe to all of us. We've seen what happens when order is imposed without room for chaos. We have to find a way to show the world that nonsense isn't the problem, it's the solution." Harold nodded reluctantly, and Mira grinned, already sketching plans for a public art installation celebrating absurdity. Felix hummed a forgotten tune, and Nina tinkered quietly with her machines, readying them for the next challenge. Outside, the city continued its strange dance, a place where misplaced Mondays might still wander. Unicorns sought parking, and time travelers queued for permits. Under the glare of the public eye, the Bureau of Absurd Affairs braced for its next act. A blend of bemused frustration and hopeful absurdity that was, after all, its very essence. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the city's surreal skyline, the question lingered in the air. Could the Bureau survive the scrutiny, or would the absurd finally be silenced? The dance was far from over. The air inside the archive room was thick with dust and the faint hum of antiquated absurdity machines, their rhythmic pulses a steady backdrop to Felix Grimble's clumsy rummaging. His colourful bow tie was askew, and spectacles perched precariously low on his nose as he sifted through decades-old files. Each folder a testament to the Bureau's tangled history of nonsense regulation. Beside him, Nina Voss crouched by a humming machine, her grease-stained fingers deftly probing its intricate innards. The technician's brow furrowed in concentration as she whispered theories about glitches possibly engineered, not accidental. "Felix," Nina murmured, her voice barely audible amid the mechanical symphony. "Look at this encrypted signals embedded in the machine's diagnostic logs. They're communicating, but not with us." Felix adjusted his glasses, leaning closer to the screen flickering with coded sequences. External regulators. But that's impossible. The Bureau is the sole authority on nonsense. "Apparently not," Nina replied, her eyes sharp. "The auditors' faction has been reaching out beyond these walls. They're recruiting allies who want to purge the chaos from society altogether." A chill ran down Felix's spine, not from the cold, but from the implications. The delicate balance they'd struggled to maintain was under siege, not just internally, but from outside forces wielding cold, unyielding logic. Later that day, the cramped conference room buzzed with a different energy. The flickering fluorescent lights cast elongated shadows over the cluttered table where Eliza, Quill, Harold, Pindle, and Myra Tock gathered. Permit forms, cryptic notes, and hastily sketched diagrams lay strewn about like battlefield maps. Felix cleared his throat, pulling up the decrypted communications on the central screen. These messages confirm if the Auditors faction has allies outside the Bureau. They're coordinating efforts to dismantle our regulation of nonsense. Harold's face paled, fingers twitching nervously as he adjusted his ill-fitting suit. "But that threatens everything we've built. Order, procedure." Mira's eyes sparkled with a different fire. "It threatens the magic, too. The freedom to be absurd. We can't let that happen." Eliza folded her arms, the familiar ink stains on her fingers catching the light. "We've been fractured, doubting each other. But now, we have to unite. Bureaucracy and creativity both are our weapons." Outside, the sharp wind carried the distant murmur of protests inspired by Myra's grassroots movement. The city was awakening to the absurdity that the Bureau protected, but the threat looming from the Auditors faction darkened the horizon. Within the Bureau, preparations accelerated. The clerks harnessed their combined skills, Harold's meticulous record-keeping, Eliza's calm strategic mind, Myra's imaginative flair, Felix's archival knowledge, and Nina's technical prowess. Each plan was a dance between order and chaos, a delicate choreography aimed at preserving the Bureau's essence. As night fell, Felix and Nina found themselves alone in the dimly lit break room. The city's distant hum softened, replaced by the gentle ticking of absurdity machines, an oddly comforting metronome. Felix stirred his tea thoughtfully. "Do you think we can really resist?" Nina smiled faintly, a spark of whimsy in her eyes. "We're the Bureau of Absurd Affairs. If anyone can, it's us." They sat in quiet solidarity, the weight of their discovery heavy but tempered by the fragile hope that comes from standing together. Outside, the dance between order and absurdity continued, and the Bureau braced for the storm ahead. The chapter closed with the Bureau's unlikely allies forging a pact not just to defend paperwork and permits, but to protect the very spirit of nonsense that made their world worth regulating. The war for absurdity's future was just beginning, and the clerks were ready to fight with wit, creativity, and the peculiar magic only bureaucracy could conjure. The day began like any other at the Bureau of Absurd Affairs, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead as clerks shuffled through their mountain of nonsensical paperwork. But beneath the mundane hum of bureaucracy, a subtle tremor was growing, one that would soon shake the very foundations of nonsense regulation. Nina Voss stood in the dimly lit control room, her hands moving deftly over the consoles that monitored the absurdity machines, those curious contraptions responsible for maintaining the delicate balance of impossibility across the city. Her brow furrowed as a sudden cascade of warning lights flickered erratically. "Not again," she muttered, the faint smell of ozone prickling her nostrils. Sparks crackled from one of the panels, sending a shower of blue-white light across the room. The machines, usually reliable in their chaotic logic, were failing. Time itself began to unravel in subtle, unsettling ways. Nina's fingers danced over the controls, trying to stabilize the cascading failures. But every adjustment seemed to deepen the paradox. Meanwhile, in the main office, Eliza Quill sat at her desk, meticulously reviewing a time travel license application. She glanced up as the clocks on the wall suddenly spun backwards, their hands whirling in dizzying circles. A misplaced Monday slipped through the calendar again, materializing on her desk like an unwelcome visitor. Her calm, usually impenetrable, faltered as she caught sight of a unicorn pacing impatiently near the water cooler. An unauthorized appearance due to the parking permit chaos. "What in the bureaucratic blazes?" Eliza whispered, pushing up her glasses, fingers twitching as she reached for a temporal recalibrator. But the device sparked and fizzled, refusing to cooperate. Across the room, Harold Pindle's usual composed demeanor cracked under pressure. His eyes darted between forms, each stamped with more errors than the last. He barked orders at the bewildered unicorns wandering the office, his voice rising in panic. No, that's the restricted zone. Move along." His oversized spectacles slid down his nose as he frantically tried to restore order, but the neat rows of paperwork were dissolving into chaos. Myratok, ever the whirlwind of energy, was a bright splash of color amid the turmoil. Her hair, a kaleidoscope of hues, bounced as she sketched feverishly in her ever-present notebook. Her whimsical creatures seemed to dance across the pages, a stark contrast to the crumbling order around her. "Maybe the madness is the point," she mused aloud, her eyes gleaming with wild inspiration. Felix Grimble shuffled in, colorful bow tie askew, spectacles perched precariously at the tip of his nose. He muttered incantations under his breath, fragments of forgotten magic from his days as a stage magician. If bureaucratic paperwork can be magic, perhaps real magic can fix paperwork, he joked, though a glimmer of hope shone in his eyes. As the absurdity machines faltered, the fabric of nonsense stretched thin. Time loops tangled, misplaced Mondays multiplied, and the city itself teetered on the edge of an impossible collapse. The Bureau's clerks found themselves not just managing paperwork, but fighting to preserve the very essence of the bizarre world they governed. Eliza gathered the team in the cramped conference room, the air thick with tension and the faint scent of burnt circuitry. "We're at a breaking point," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the turmoil. If we don't act fast, the entire system could unravel. Harold swallowed hard, his rigid resolve wavering. But what if? What if the rules themselves are part of the problem? Mira's grin was infectious. Then maybe it's time to rewrite them. Felix nodded, his magical mumblings growing louder. Sometimes, the most absurd solutions are the only ones that work. Nina's fingers flew over the controls one last time, sending a surge of power into the failing machines. The alarms ceased, the lights steadied, and a fragile calm returned. But the crisis had left its mark. The bureau was changed, its clerks forever altered by the chaos they'd survived. They understood now that nonsense was not simply disorder to be managed, but a vital force to be embraced and nurtured. As the team dispersed, Eliza lingered by the window, watching a unicorn vanish into the city's mist. She whispered to herself, quoting a line from obscure absurdist literature, "We must love the chaos if we are to master it." Outside, the city pulsed with the strange heartbeat of nonsense, unpredictable, unruly, and utterly alive. The breaking point had passed, but the dance between order and absurdity was far from over. And somewhere in the shadows, the mirrored mask of the auditor gleamed, watching, waiting for the next move. The Bureau's future hung in the balance. A precarious tightrope stretched between logic and lunacy, with every clerk poised to step forward or fall back into the abyss of reason. Yet even in the darkest moments, hope flickered, a stubborn, improbable light refusing to be extinguished. The dance continued. Eliza Quill stood motionless in the dim glow of the Bureau's control room, the low hum of malfunctioning absurdity monitors filling the silence like the uneasy heartbeat of a faltering organism. Each blinking light and flickering screen signaled a fracture in the delicate balance she had sworn to maintain. Time travel licenses were misfiring, misplaced Mondays multiplied unchecked, and unicorn parking spots overflowed beyond their designated zones. The very fabric of nonsense itself was unraveling. Around her, the familiar walls of the Bureau of Absurd Affairs felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cage tightening. With every paradox and procedural failure, her fingers perpetually stained with ink from the endless forms she processed, trembled slightly as she reached for the latest reporter dossier detailing a rogue time travel permit that had already caused 3 temporal anomalies and threatened to erase a minor league baseball game from existence. The absurdity of it was almost laughable, if not for the creeping dread that this was just the beginning. "Eliza," a voice broke through her reverie. Harold Pindle appeared in the doorway, his slicked back grey hair slightly mussed, oversized spectacles slipping down his nose. His expression was a mixture of worry and rigid resolve. "We must clamp down harder. If we don't enforce the rules without exception, everything will descend into chaos." She turned to face him, her gaze steady but weary. "Harold, the chaos is already here. The rules aren't enough anymore. We need to rethink how we manage nonsense." Harold's lips pressed into a thin line. Rethink, that's a slippery slope. Without order, there's only anarchy. We are the gatekeepers. Before Eliza could respond, the sound of rapid footsteps echoed down the corridor. Myra Tock burst into the room, her brightly colored hair almost glowing under the fluorescent lights, sketchbook clutched tightly. Order isn't the only way. Sometimes you have to let the absurd breathe to keep it alive. The 3 of them stood there, Eliza, the pragmatic skeptic, Harold, the rule-obsessed guardian, and Mira, the whimsical rebel, each embodying a facet of the Bureau's fractured soul. "I've been working on a new approach," Eliza began cautiously, "one that blends structure with spontaneity. We can't just enforce nonsense. We have to embrace it, guide it, without suffocating it. Harold shook his head. Guidance is a euphemism for chaos. I won't let this place become a circus. Their argument was interrupted by an unnatural chill settling over the room. The auditor had arrived. The stoic figure in the black suit stood silently at the threshold, faceless behind a mirrored mask that reflected the flickering lights and the anxious faces before him. Without a word, he extended a gloved hand holding a document stamped with the seal of ultra-rational order. This is your final warning. The auditor's voice echoed coldly, devoid of emotion but heavy with threat. Cease this folly of nonsense regulation. Eliminate absurdity, and society will progress unhindered. Eliza's heart pounded, but her voice remained steady. Nonsense is not folly. It's the pulse of creativity, the breath of imagination. Without it, this bureau, the world, loses its soul. The auditor's mirrored mask seemed to flicker momentarily, as if reflecting a hidden turmoil. Then, turning sharply, he departed, leaving a silence that weighed heavier than any words. In the days that followed, the bureau was gripped by tension and uncertainty. Felix Grimble, the eccentric archivist with his kaleidoscope of bow ties, rummaged through dusty files and ancient permits, searching for forgotten wisdom. Nina Voss, grease-stained and focused, worked tirelessly to stabilize the absurdity machines, her sharp eyes catching every irregular pulse. Eliza found herself at her desk late one night, the world outside the bureau's windows swallowed by darkness. The only light came from her desk lamp, casting long shadows over her ink-stained fingers as they danced across the paper. She wrote feverishly, sketching out a manifesto that would redefine the bureau's purpose, the blueprint for a future where order and chaos coexisted in a dynamic, delicate balance. Her thoughts wandered to the past, the misplaced Tuesdays, the rogue licenses, the endless forms that both tethered and liberated the strangest city office in existence. She remembered the quote she often muttered in moments of stress, from an obscure, absurdist poet: to regulate the impossible is to dance with shadows on the edge of reason. The choice before her was clear yet daunting. Cling to the brittle safety of rigid bureaucracy, risking collapse under the weight of its own contradictions, or leap into the unknown, embracing the unpredictable heartbeat of nonsense, and trust that from chaos, new order might emerge. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the city in hues of orange and rose, Eliza sealed her manifesto with a decisive stroke. The Bureau's future, and perhaps the future of absurdity itself, rested on the fragile promise of a dance that would never end. "Let the dance continue," she whispered, a faint smile touching her lips, "but this time we lead with open hands." Outside, the first misplaced Monday in weeks winked into existence, its chaotic presence heralding the beginning of a new chapter for the Bureau of Absurd Affairs. And so, at the crossroads of fate, Eliza Quill chose not between order and chaos, but for the harmony that can only be born when the two embrace. The journey ahead was uncertain, the rules rewritten and the absurdity unleashed, but within that uncertainty lay the promise of something truly extraordinary. The fluorescent lights of the Bureau of Absurd Affairs flickered ominously, casting long shadows across the sterile conference room where the final confrontation was about to unfold. At the head of the long polished table stood the auditor, his faceless mirrored mask reflecting the anxious faces of the clerks arrayed before him. His black suit was impeccable, the embodiment of cold rationality, every inch a stark contrast to the colorful chaos the Bureau represented. "This office," he began, his voice a chilling monotone, "has become a breeding ground for disorder and inefficiency. It is time to restore true order. Nonsense must be eradicated. Effective immediately. All absurd phenomena regulations are hereby null and void. A stunned silence fell over the room. Eliza Quill's fingers twitched. The ink stains on her hands a testament to years spent navigating the labyrinthine forms that governed impossibility itself. Her sharp eyes met the auditor's mask, a flicker of defiance igniting within. Beside her, Harold Pindle straightened his ill-fitting suit, clutching his stack of unicorn parking permits with a mixture of fear and determination. Miratok bounced on the balls of her feet, sketchbook clutched tightly, her vibrant hair a stark beacon of rebellion. The auditor's proclamation was the spark that ignited a firestorm of resistance. The clerks knew that surrendering to pure logic meant the death of the bureau's very essence, the celebration and careful management of the absurd. But how to fight an enemy who wielded reason like a weapon, and who commanded a faction of ultra-rational bureaucrats bent on purging nonsense from society? In the cramped corners of the office, the clerks convened in whispered urgency. Eliza, with her calm pragmatism, spearheaded the strategy sessions. "We know the rules better than anyone," she said, her voice steady yet charged with unspoken passion. "If the auditor wants to dismantle nonsense, we'll weaponize the bureaucracy itself. We'll exploit every loophole, every contradictory regulation. Let absurdity be our shield." Harold, though hesitant, found himself drawn into the plan. His obsession with order now served a higher purpose, preserving the very chaos he feared. Myra's whimsical energy infused the group with creative vigor, her sketches evolving into intricate diagrams of protest and policy subversion. The once disparate clerks were united by a common cause. Felix Grimble, the eccentric archivist, emerged from the shadows clutching a dusty tome of forgotten permits and magic-infused paperwork. "If paperwork is the backbone of bureaucracy," he quipped, adjusting his colorful bow tie, "then magic is its beating heart." As the auditor's forces moved to seize control, they found themselves ensnared in a web of contradictory directives. Misplaced Mondays reappearing unpredictably, and time travel licenses that bent causality in their favor. Felix's unexpected magical interventions realigned the errant days, restoring fractured timelines and confusing the purging agents. Nina Voss, with grease-streaked hands, kept the absurdity machines humming against all odds, while Carl Tannen rewrote legalese with a twist of imaginative loopholes that confounded the auditor's faction. The bureau buzzed with a renewed energy, a symphony of bureaucratic absurdity orchestrated by its most devoted clerks. Juno Sparks, ever the watchful journalist, documented the upheaval with relentless zeal, her camera capturing moments of defiance, laughter, and unexpected camaraderie. The public, drawn in by her exposes, began to see the value in the Bureau's peculiar mandate, a balance between order and chaos that fostered creativity and joy. In a climactic standoff, the auditor confronted Eliza once more. His mask gleamed coldly under the harsh lights. "You persist in this folly," he intoned. "But the world demands progress, not chaos." Eliza met his gaze, her voice unwavering. "Progress without imagination is stagnation. The absurd isn't the enemy, it's the spark that keeps us human." The confrontation ended not with violence, but with a reluctant acknowledgement. The auditor's rigid vision fractured under the weight of the Bureau's resilient absurdity. The clerks had not only preserved their world, but had transformed it, blending the precision of bureaucracy with the unpredictable magic of nonsense. As the dust settled, the Bureau stood reborn, a place where order and chaos danced in uneasy harmony. Eliza looked around at her colleagues, their faces alight with hope tempered by the scars of battle. The fight was far from over, But the last stand had been won. Outside, the city hummed with the quiet magic of misplaced Mondays, the subtle shimmer of unicorn parking badges, and the endless possibilities of time travel licenses, all regulated by the Bureau of Absurd Affairs, guardians of the impossible. And as the clerks returned to their desks, the dance between order and absurdity continued, a delicate, joyful waltz that promised new adventures just beyond the next form to be filled, the next paradox to be tamed, the next absurdity to be embraced. After all, Eliza mused, quoting one of her favorite absurdist texts, "Logic will get you from A to B. Imagination will take you everywhere." The chapter closed on that note, a promise, a challenge, a hope. The Bureau lived on. In the grey dawn of a city that thrived on nonsense, the Bureau of Absurd Affairs awoke to a storm. The usual hum of fluorescent lights and the soft clatter of keyboards was pierced by an unrelenting chorus of news alerts and social media uproar. Juno Sparks, the Bureau's most persistent and sardonic investigator, had released her latest expose, and it was a bombshell. The article, titled "Paperwork or Folly," inside the Bureau of Absurd Affairs, spread like wildfire. Juno's words were sharp, her tone unyielding. She described the Bureau as a Kafkaesque labyrinth of contradictory rules, whimsical mandates, and bureaucratic inertia. With a mixture of wit and scathing critique, she exposed the tangled webs of time travel licenses, unicorn parking permits, and the baffling phenomenon of misplaced Mondays that the clerks managed daily. She questioned the sanity and necessity of regulating nonsense, painting the Bureau as both a guardian and a prisoner of absurdity. The press conference announcing the expose was a spectacle. Juno stood under the harsh glare of camera flashes, her red hair a vibrant beacon against the backdrop of grim-faced reporters. Her voice rang out clear and uncompromising as she answered questions, weaving anecdotes from clandestine interviews with clerks and leaked documents that revealed internal conflicts and procedural chaos. The public was captivated, divided between amusement, disbelief, and genuine concern. Back inside the Bureau, the impact was immediate and palpable. Eliza Quill sat at her cluttered desk, the glow of her cracked monitor illuminating her face as she read the headline for the third time. Her fingers, perpetually stained with ink from frantic note-taking and form-filling, clenched reflexively around a time travel permit. The words on the screen echoed her own conflicted thoughts. Was their work a noble defense of the impossible, or merely a farce wrapped in red tape? Harold Pindle's office was a stark contrast, a sanctuary of order in the chaos. Yet even here, tension seeped through the walls. Harold paced anxiously, clutching a sheaf of unicorn parking permits as if they were lifelines. His slicked-back grey hair seemed more disheveled than usual, and his oversized spectacles glinted with worry. Nearby, Myra Tock sat cross-legged on the floor, her brightly colored hair a splash of rebellion amid the dull palette of bureaucratic despair. She doodled whimsical creatures on a notepad, her sketches a silent protest against the mounting pressure. "They don't understand," Harold muttered, his voice tight. "We keep things from spiraling into chaos. Without us, the city would be overrun by unregulated nonsense." Mira shrugged, her eyes sparkling with mischievous defiance. "Or maybe they're just tired of the nonsense we call order. Maybe it's time for something new." Felix Grimble and Nina Voss were a study in contrast. Felix, with his colorful bow ties and spectacles perched low on his nose, shuffled through piles of files with a distracted cheerfulness that belied the urgency of the moment. Nina, practical and focused, adjusted the settings on a malfunctioning absurdity machine, her grease-stained hands moving with precise determination, Together, they whispered plans and theories, their unlikely alliance a beacon of hope amid the swirling uncertainty. "We have to show them what the Bureau really does," Felix said, eyes twinkling behind his glasses. "Not just the paperwork, but the magic beneath." The public debate raged on. Some saw the Bureau as a necessary absurdity, a quirky but vital safeguard that protected the city's delicate balance between reality and nonsense. Others viewed it as an outdated, costly relic clinging desperately to power in a world that demanded rationality and order. Carl Tannen, the legal advisor, found himself drafting new statements and clarifications amid the chaos, his conservative demeanor strained by the need to adapt. Greta Loop, the receptionist, fielded a flood of ridiculous requests and angry calls, her dry wit a small comfort to both callers and clerks alike. As the day wore on, the clerks gathered in the break room, a motley group united by shared confusion and determination. Eliza, her voice steady despite the turmoil, addressed them. "This isn't just about us," she said. "It's about what nonsense means to this city, and maybe to all of us. We've seen what happens when order is imposed without room for chaos. We have to find a way to show the world that nonsense isn't the problem, it's the solution." Harold nodded reluctantly, and Mira grinned, already sketching plans for a public art installation celebrating absurdity. Felix hummed a forgotten tune, and Nina tinkered quietly with her machines, readying them for the next challenge. Outside, the city continued its strange dance, a place where misplaced Mondays might still wander. Unicorns sought parking, and time travelers queued for permits. Under the glare of the public eye, the Bureau of Absurd Affairs braced for its next act, a blend of bemused frustration and hopeful absurdity that was, after all, its very essence. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the city's surreal skyline, the question lingered in the air. Could the Bureau survive the scrutiny, or would the absurd finally be silenced? The dance was far from over. The city's square pulsed with an energy rarely seen outside the pages of the Bureau's own surreal reports. Stretched taut between lampposts were banners as impossibly vivid as Myra's brightly colored hair, fluttering like the wings of some fantastical creature born from the collective whimsy of the gathered crowd. Street performers, their costumes a patchwork of improbable hues and shapes, weaved through clusters of onlookers, their movements a dance both practiced and delightfully chaotic. The air was thick with the scent of spilled ink from freshly printed pamphlets, the sharp tang of citrus from street vendors, and the distant hum of street musicians tuning their instruments for the evening's crescendo. At the heart of this spectacle stood Myra Tock, her mismatched clothes a vibrant manifesto of the absurd, clutching her ever-present sketchbook as if it were a talisman. Her voice rang clear and passionate, carrying the rallying cry that had ignited this spontaneous festival. The celebration of nonsense, not as a nuisance, but as a vital thread in the city's tapestry. Around her, faces lit with smiles, eyes gleamed with the recognition of something long suppressed yet deeply yearned for. Children chased after whimsical creatures that seemed to have slipped out from Mira's doodles, their laughter weaving into the city's nocturnal symphony. Meanwhile, inside the more staid chambers of the Bureau, Eliza Quill prepared for a different kind of performance. The conference room, bathed in the sterile glow of fluorescent lights, was a stark contrast to the riotous colors just beyond its walls. Here, rows of muted suits and skeptical eyes awaited her words. Papers, once impenetrable tomes of bureaucratic rigidity, now bore the touch of Eliza's reformist-spirited delicate balancing act of maintaining order without suffocating creativity. As Eliza stepped to the podium, her fingers ink-stained from the countless hours poring over regulations stamped rhythmically against the surface. She began with a quote from a little-known absurdist philosopher, a subtle nod that was met with a puzzled yet intrigued murmur. Her voice was calm but resolute, weaving logic and whimsy into a tapestry that argued not for anarchy but for an evolved understanding, one where structure served as the stage for the spontaneous dance of nonsense. Harold Pindle sat rigidly beside her, his oversized spectacles catching the light as his eyes flickered between the proposal and the faces in the room. His usual anxiety was tempered by a flicker of reluctant hope, sign of the profound shifts occurring not only in the bureau but within himself. The tension was palpable, a tightrope stretched between tradition and transformation. Outside the formal proceedings, Juno Sparks moved like a whirlwind, her camera snapping candid shots that captured the bureau's newfound humanity. Her sharp eyes found moments of genuine connection, Felix Grimble's colorful bow tie peeking from behind a mountain of papers. Greta Loop's warm smile as she greeted visitors with a blend of professionalism and mischief. Each image was a testament to the bureau's evolving identity, a story told through laughter and light that Juno was eager to share with a public hungry for understanding. In the quiet sanctuary of the archives, Felix and Carl Tannen worked side by side, an unlikely duo united by purpose. Felix's eccentric cheerfulness softened Carl's legalistic precision, their conversations a blend of magical anecdotes and meticulous clause crafting. By the dim glow of a single desk lamp, they drafted the new legal framework and embodiment of the Bureau's commitment to balance. Here, the past's forgotten magic met the future's pragmatic needs, forging a path forward that honored both. As the festival's last notes faded into the night, and the council's decision hung in the air like a held breath, a palpable shift settled over the Bureau. The dance between order and absurdity was no longer a precarious balancing act, but a harmonious choreography. Myra's vision, once dismissed as naive, had sparked a cultural movement. Eliza's steady hand had navigated the complexities of policy to open the door to possibility. And somewhere in the depths of the Bureau, a single misplaced Monday slipped quietly back into its rightful place, proof that sometimes embracing the impossible was the only way to truly keep control. The night ended not with resolution, but with an invitation to continue the dance, to celebrate the absurd, and to cherish the magic woven into the madness. The Bureau of Absurd Affairs was no longer just a regulator of nonsense. It had become its most devoted guardian and its most enthusiastic advocate. As the city lights flickered and the stars winked knowingly overhead, the question lingered in the minds of all who had witnessed the transformation. How long could they sustain this delicate balance? But for now, in this moment, hope reigned, wrapped in the colorful cloak of absurdity. The dance continues. In the waning light of a rather ordinary afternoon, the Bureau of Absurd Affairs buzzed with a peculiar energy that only a place dedicated to the regulation of nonsense could muster. The usual hum of fluorescent lights and the tapping of keyboards were joined by the unmistakable click of a camera shutter as Juno Sparks, the Bureau's ever-curious investigative journalist, maneuvered through the labyrinth of desks and filing cabinets with practiced ease. Her short red hair caught stray beams of light, and the leather jacket she wore seemed almost a badge of honor in this sanctuary of absurdity. Juno had spent weeks embedded within the Bureau's chaotic heart, chronicling the peculiar rituals and bureaucratic ballet that governed the world's most illogical permits. Now, as she sat in the cluttered office, surrounded by piles of files, photographs, and the odd misplaced Monday calendar, the words flowed from her fingers like a river of wit and insight. Each keystroke was a tribute to the clerks who had welcomed her into their world, a world where unicorn parking rules were as serious as any legal code, and where the line between reality and nonsense was as thin as a bureaucrat's patience. "You know," Juno mused aloud, glancing up from her laptop, "this place is less about control and more about celebrating the chaos within order." Felix Grimble, the Bureau's beloved archivist, looked up from his colorful bow tie and spectacles perched precariously on his nose. "Ah, Miss Sparks, you capture it well. The magic is in the madness, after all." Felix was in the midst of entertaining a small gathering of clerks during a brief respite from paperwork. With a flourish, he produced a deck of cards that seemed to shimmer with impossibility. A quick shuffle, a dramatic flick, and suddenly a cascade of sparkling confetti fluttered down like enchanted snow, eliciting peals of laughter from his audience. His cheerful eccentricity was a balm to the weary souls of the Bureau, a reminder that beneath the layers of red tape and regulation lay the heart of joyful nonsense. Eliza Quill, the lead clerk with her short cropped dark hair and perpetually ink-stained fingers, observed the scene with a faint smile. Years ago, she had been a skeptical enforcer of rules, wary of the chaos that threatened to undermine her carefully constructed order. But now, sitting beside Myra Tock, whose brightly colored hair and mismatched clothes seemed to embody the Bureau's spirit, she felt a reluctant sense of pride. "Juno's piece," Eliza said quietly, "it's not just satire, it's a mirror." Myra nodded enthusiastically, her sketchbook balanced on her knees as she doodled a whimsical creature inspired by Felix's latest trick. "It shows that we're more than just clerks and regulations. We're guardians of a vital kind of magic." The Bureau's inner sanctum was no longer a place of mere absurd administration. It had become a living testament to the human need for laughter amidst chaos, for order that did not smother imagination. Juno's Expos was more than a story. It was a celebration of their collective journey, a journey that had seen skepticism give way to acceptance, rigidity soften into flexibility, and isolation bloom into community. As the day faded into evening, the staff gathered in the common rumor space, where official seals adorned walls alongside Myra's vibrant doodles, where the scent of old paper mingled with the faint aroma of Felix's herbal tea. Under the soft glow of retro 80s style lamps, stories were exchanged, laughter bubbled freely, and the boundaries between clerk and friend blurred. To the Bureau, Felix toasted, raising a mismatched mug, "May our nonsense never be tamed." The room echoed with cheers, the sound a harmonious blend of bemused frustration and hopeful absurdity that defined their peculiar existence. In this moment, the legacy of laughter was not just a memory, but a living, breathing promise that no matter the challenges ahead, the Bureau of Absurd Affairs would continue its delicate dance between order and chaos, forever cherishing the magic within the madness. But even as the laughter lingered, shadows of future trials whispered beyond the horizon, reminding them that in the world of nonsense, the next absurd adventure was never far away. The Bureau of Absurd Affairs never quite looked the same after the tumultuous events that had racked its fluorescent-lit halls. Yet, on this particular morning, the familiar hum of absurdity machines filled the air with a comforting rhythm, a testament to resilience forged in the crucible of chaos. Eliza Quill sat at her desk, fingers ink-stained as always, eyes fixed on the intricate details of a time travel license. Her demeanor, once rigid and skeptical, now shimmered with a quiet acceptance. Across the room, Myra Tock's bright hair caught the pale light as she doodled fantastical creatures in her ever-present sketchbook, her whimsical energy a spark that had ignited new life within the Bureau's walls. Harold Pindle, the ever-anxious supervisor, stood by the window, his oversized spectacles perched precariously as he gazed out over a city where unicorns parked with an elegant disregard for traditional rules. The skyline was a patchwork of the impossible and the mundane, a fitting backdrop for a place where nonsense was not only tolerated but meticulously managed. Harold's lips twitched into a rare smile, a sign of his gradual embrace of the Bureau's evolving ethos. He had learned, sometimes the hard way, that order and chaos were not adversaries but partners in a delicate dance. Nearby, Juno Sparks adjusted her camera lens, capturing moments that spoke to the Bureau's paradoxical nature, a place where paperwork piled high and absurdity flowed freely. Her exposures had stirred public debate, but here, amidst the stacks of forms and the occasional malfunctioning absurdity machine, she found a story far richer than mere scandal. It was a human story, filled with the humor, frustration, and hope that came from trying to govern the ungovernable. Felix, Grimble, and Nina Voss huddled over a particularly stubborn absurdity machine, their laughter mingling with the clinks and whirs of their tinkering. Felix, with his colorful bow ties and magician's flair, was a reminder that magic still lingered in unexpected places. Nina's practical expertise grounded their efforts, bridging the gap between fantasy and function. Together, they symbolized the Bureau's spirit, a blend of creativity and pragmatism. Eliza rose from her desk, her gaze sweeping across the room filled with clerks who had become more than colleagues. They were a peculiar family, bound by a shared mission. She approached Myra and Harold, the trio emblematic of the Bureau's journey from conflict to collaboration. "We've come a long way," Eliza said, her voice carrying the weight of experience softened by newfound hope. "The dance between order and absurdity isn't about choosing sides. It's about knowing the steps and when to improvise." Myra's eyes sparkled behind her mismatched glasses. "And sometimes you just have to twirl wildly and see where it takes you." Harold adjusted his suit jacket, a gesture more comfortable now than defensive. "I'm beginning to see that rules aren't chains, but guides. They help us keep the nonsense meaningful, not meaningless." Their conversation was interrupted by Greta Loop at reception, who waved a sheaf of new requests. "Looks like the city's nonsense quota is climbing again," she said with a grin. "Ready for another day of delightful madness." The clerks exchanged knowing smiles. In this bureau, every day brought a fresh puzzle, misplaced Mondays to redirect, time travel permits to scrutinize, unicorn parking violations to adjudicate. Yet, beneath the absurdity, there was purpose, and in purpose, a kind of order that made nonsense not only manageable but magical. As the afternoon light waned and the city outside shimmered with improbable hues, the Bureau of Absurd Affairs continued its eternal dance. It was a dance without end or perfect rhythm, marked by missteps and improvisations, but always moving forward. Within its walls, the clerks embraced their roles with bemused frustration and hopeful absurdity, guardians of a world where the impossible was not just allowed but celebrated. And so the Bureau stood equal parts, farce and function, a monument to the complexity of human desire for both control and chaos. Theirs was a story unfinished, a dance ongoing, inviting all who dared to join in the joyful madness, ready for the next step. Eliza asked, a sly smile tugging at her lips. "Always," Myra replied, "sketchbook at the ready." Harold nodded, the weight of tradition lightened by the promise of change. As the doors swung open to another day of nonsense, the Bureau's delicate balance held firm, a testament to the enduring magic found in embracing the impossible.